Your eye color isn't decoration, it's a survival record, a bet your ancestors' bodies made about how much sun they could take, how much light they needed to see by, and where on Earth they were fighting to stay alive. And that bet is still sitting in your face right now, every time you look in a mirror. Let's actually read it. Start with brown, because it's not one option among many, it's the original setting. Every human being on Earth had brown eyes first. The color comes from eumelanin, a pigment so dense it absorbs the majority of light that hits it, instead of letting it bounce around the iris. Functionally, it's internal eyewear, built in before sunglasses existed. Vision researchers studying UV exposure across equatorial populations have linked higher iris melanin to meaningfully lower rates of certain sun-related eye conditions over a lifetime. That's not a small edge. For early humans standing under direct equatorial sun for hundreds of thousands of years, that protection was the difference between eyes that lasted a lifetime and eyes that didn't. And here's the part almost nobody notices. Brown eyes barely shift under changing light. They stay rich and stable everywhere, which is exactly why, right now, more than 2/3 of the human species still carries this exact setting. It's not the default because it's boring. It's the default because it worked, and it's still working. Then, something broke. Somewhere between 6 and 10,000 years ago, a single mutation near the OCA2 gene showed up in a population near the Black Sea and quietly shut off most of the iris's melanin production. That's blue eyes. And here's the detail that stops people. Geneticists tracing this mutation through ancient DNA have found that every blue-eyed person alive today descends from that one single ancestral carrier. Not a category, a bloodline. Blue isn't even a pigment, it's an absence. And what you're actually seeing is called Tyndall scattering, the exact optical effect that makes the sky blue. Short wavelengths bounce back out of a low melanin iris, while longer ones get absorbed underneath. Less melanin means less UV protection, a real biological cost. So this trait should have died out fast. Instead, it exploded, from essentially zero to dominating entire populations in Northern Europe within a few thousand years. Two competing theories try to explain that. One says it offered a small edge in the low, overcast light of northern winters. The other says it was simple sexual selection. In a sea of identical dark eyes, rare and strange got chosen more often, and rarity became the advantage. And here's the twist that upended the field entirely. Ancient remains have turned up early Europeans with blue eyes paired with dark skin, proving light eyes evolved before light skin did. The two traits didn't arrive as a package the way everyone assumed. Gray pushes that same mutation even further than blue does. Less melanin still, which means the light doesn't scatter cleanly into one wavelength. It scatters broadly across several at once. That's why gray eyes never really settle on one shade. Silver in one light, slate in another, a faint wash of green in a third. Ophthalmologists studying glare sensitivity by iris type find gray-eyed populations report light sensitivity nearly identical to blue-eyed ones. The trade-off for that low light advantage is a vulnerability to bright environments that never fully goes away. Green is the rarest common eye color on the planet, roughly 2% of humans, and it's less a color than a chemical coincidence. It needs a precise, narrow balance, a small amount of melanin plus a yellow pigment called lipochrome, tuned so exactly that shifting it even slightly pushes the eye toward brown on one side or blue on the other. That instability is real, not perceptual. Green eyes genuinely shift toward moss in shadow and gold in direct light, which is exactly why they've been a magnet for folklore for centuries, long before anyone had a name for lipochrome. In parts of Ireland and Scotland, researchers have documented local green eye frequencies running dramatically higher than the global average, a rare trait concentrated hard in one corner of the world. Hazel takes that same instability and makes it the whole point. It sits on an intermediate melanin level with its own trace of lipochrome, positioned so it genuinely responds to whatever light it's in. Sunlight pulls gold forward, shade pushes green up. A dim room can make it read almost brown. That's not your imagination. It's the physical structure of the iris reacting in real time. Population geneticists describe hazel less as a single trait and more as a genetic blend zone, several melanin-regulating genes landing in the middle instead of committing to an extreme, which is exactly why two hazel-eyed siblings can look nothing alike, and why the same person's eyes can look different in two photos taken an hour apart. Amber does the opposite of hazel. It doesn't shift at all. High lipochrome, almost no melanin, and it stays a solid, uniform gold copper no matter what light hits it. It's rare enough in humans, under 5%, that it's often mistaken for light brown or hazel by people who've never actually seen it side by side. Here's the detail that makes it interesting. That exact pigment configuration shows up far more often in predator species than in humans: wolves, hawks, owls. Researchers studying facial perception have found people rate amber eyes as more alert or intense than other colors. And the leading explanation is that the brain is pattern matching that gold copper tone to predator eyes it evolved to notice fast. At the far end from blue and gray sits true dark brown, saturated with so much eumelanin it reads as black in almost any light. It isn't a separate biological category. It's simply the ceiling of melanin concentration, and it's the most efficient light-absorbing iris the human eye produces. In populations that evolved under the most relentless UV exposure on the planet, equatorial Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, that ceiling-level pigment isn't cosmetic. It's peak sun defense, absorbing UV almost completely before it reaches deeper structures in the eye. And there's a strange side effect researchers studying facial expression have flagged. Because so little light reflects back out of a heavily pigmented iris, subtle pupil dilation, the physical tell that usually leaks emotion, becomes much harder for other people to consciously read, which may be exactly why very dark eyes get culturally coded as unreadable again and again across completely unrelated cultures. And then heterochromia, which isn't a pigment strategy at all, it's a break in one. Melanin normally distributes with near-perfect symmetry across both irises before birth. Heterochromia happens when that symmetry fails, sometimes from a small localized mutation, sometimes from mosaicism, occasionally from an injury or medical condition much later in life. It shows up in under 1% of people, and geneticists have identified multiple distinct pathways that can all produce the same visible result, meaning there isn't one cause, there are several converging on one outcome. It rarely affects vision. What it affects is perception, because it breaks a pattern the human brain quietly expects on every face it sees: facial symmetry. And for most of history, that break got filled in with meaning, duality, second sight, one foot in two different worlds. Here's what all of it adds up to. Every eye color on this planet is a chapter of the same story, a bet your ancestors' bodies made and won often enough to hand down to you. Brown bet everything on maximum protection, and it's still the safest bet on Earth. Blue bet on rarity and low light sensitivity at a real cost, and somehow it paid off anyway. Green found an almost impossibly narrow chemical window and has been holding on to it for thousands of years. None of it is decoration. All of it is survival, still visible, still running, right now, in a mirror near you. So, what's your eye color? And does any of this actually match how the world treats you? Tell me below. I read every single comment.